Well, and one of the things that we have seen over the years is we've seen a lot of house cleaners who have had challenges trying to conceive because they are affected by either their diets or the things that they're breathing or whatever. And I know that as mothers, we we have more of a tendency to think about, well, I'm the mother. Here's what is affecting me. But tell me about the cleaning effects and how that might affect the fetus of a baby that's not born yet.
Yeah, that's such a great question. Okay, so I will say one thing that I think is important. In fact, two things that I think are really important to understand this. First, fertility is a team sport. Okay. So it is not just to do with the female. And you can have a woman do all of the right things and still have sperm from a male that is really under par and that will produce increased risk of miscarriage and difficulty conceiving. Okay. So what many people don't understand that a miscarriage, for example, or the loss of a child in utero is actually 40% to do with female factor, 40% to do with male factor, and 20% to do with embryonic factor.
Wow.
Okay.
I did not know that.
Yeah, yeah. And many people don't, right? So, like, say those couples that cling together, that are exposed to those chemicals together, they will both be impacted from a reproductive perspective. The second thing we need to understand, and this is incredibly critical, fertility is, and this is a very big word, but it's passed on through generations. It's what's known as transgenerational. We now know that what our grandmother ate impacts the quality of our health today. And we also know that what you do today as a mother or as a prospective mother will impact your child's health and their child's health. So we need to take those things into account when we are talking about fertility, because the truth is that most people conceive without trying. It's really just a very small percentage of the population where people have severe issues. And just because it's a small percentage, it doesn't make it any easier, for someone going through infertility. At this stage, we know that 1 in 6 couples experiences difficulty in conceiving and keeping a healthy pregnancy to term. Miscarriages are highly, highly likely. And sometimes what happens is that most prospective mothers, they don't know that they're pregnant until much later on. So what happens is, for many couples that are struggling to see a positive pregnancy test, sometimes what's happening is that they are conceiving, but they're not actually, implantation isn't happening. The embryo, that baby is not sticking. And so miscarriages keep occurring. But the chemicals and the exposure to those chemicals, in fact, the exposure to anything that could be detrimental to a developing baby, are things that are in our day-to-day. Like, for example, something that we may not even realize. Those fragrance products, those kind of like sprays and those things that people put on in their cars and in their, like, those dangly things.
I am not a fan of those. No, I get around those and they just make my eyes go bloodshot and my nose is like this. And then I'm like, why do people do this? And they're popular.
Exactly. And it's one of the most toxic things that people could do. It masks this particular smell. Well, let's look at why the smell is there to begin with, and let's try and address that, because all of those types of things that we don't even think about, like even during the pandemic, I mean, one of the hugest things was hand sanitizers. Hand sanitizers are full of triclosan. That is a chemical that's directly related to hormonal imbalances and endocrine disruption. Whether you walk in the aisle of a supermarket or whether you store your chemicals that have arrived, somehow in your workplace or your home, there is a different smell. And that in itself is a cue. It's and a clue of the fact that you are literally breathing in these chemicals. Okay.
Well, so tell me this. If it's not just cleaning chemicals, it's probably also everything that smells, like laundry detergent.
Absolutely.
Soaps and deodorants and things like that.
The plastic containers that they come in, that plastic will leach into the product as well. And that plastic is, mostly phthalates, bisphenols, these very kind of potent chemicals that have an impact on hormones. So you're absolutely right. It's not just what you use to clean, but it's how you do your laundry, how you brush your teeth, what shampoo you use, what soap you use, all of those things. And this is a piece that I have to educate my patients on all the time, because we know that really detrimental impacts that some cleaning products, most commercially available cleaning products can have. So the only best way to reduce the impact of those things is by changing the exposures that we find ourselves facing, right? And so understanding what it is that we're using, to what degree, how we're protecting ourselves, following the guidelines of making sure that you have open windows and, all of those things is all going to help. And storing chemicals, cleaning products or otherwise, underneath the sink, it's going to permeate your whole house. No matter what, those volatile organic compounds are the things that we breathe in are the very mechanism in which these chemicals impact hormonal health and reproductive health.